Welcome to Pretty Lies and Alibis. Let's seek the truth and travel the long road to justice together. What you know, Alibis, welcome to another episode of Pretty Lies and Alibis. I'm Gigi. Good to have you here on this Friday. Hope you guys have something fun planned for the weekend. Maybe you're just going to chill out. Either way, it's all good, but we made it. First off, I have to thank Janet for some birthday gifts. She sent me this awesome shirt. It says Gigi Rocks with a guitar and some music notes. And then a little something for on my porch. It says, welcome to Gigi's Place, weekends, weekdays, whenever. That's pretty much the rules of my porch. Come cop a squat anytime you want. Thank you so much for your generosity, Miss Janet. It means a lot to me. Let's jump into this hearing. This is the first time Alec has been in court since his murder trial. The hearing was held in Beaufort County. At first, they started talking about Russell Laffitte, and Creighton Waters, the prosecutor, wants to schedule his trial date on the state charges. Laffitte's attorney said nothing has changed on that federal case. The Fourth Circuit has not decided on the motion for appeal bond. Right now, he's currently scheduled to report to prison on September 21st. That's this coming Thursday. That is, unless he is granted an appeal bond. So he's currently appealing that federal case, and he wants to stay out longer until that's resolved. The attorney had actually expected a decision by the time this hearing happened yesterday, but he did not get it. Judge Newman said he's here to talk about the state's case, and the defense says there is a relationship between those two cases because the evidence is pretty much the same. He's also charged in 3 cases with Murdaugh as a co-defendant. There has been no motion to sever filed yet. The defense says Waters wants to try a case with Alec that doesn't involve Laffitte. The judge says ultimately they'll hear Murdaugh's case first and then they would bring them back in. So in comes Alec Murdaugh. His hair's grown out a bit, not quite as closely shaved. He walked in smiling, shook one of our, I believe it's a state representative's hands before he sat down. And in the beginning, he was smiling a bit, but as this went on, you could definitely see he was getting a little irritated. He shot a really nasty look over to Creighton Waters. If you're on YouTube, I've got that up now. But the totality of these charges, he has 101 charges for a loss of about $8.8 million. Creighton Waters says they looked at trial dates, and he said the priority case right now is the Satterfield case, Gloria Satterfield, the former housekeeper, where Alec and Cory Fleming stole money from her 2 sons. The state asked to schedule this trial ASAP, hopefully before the end of this year. Now, the defense got up and Dick Harpootlian said there are a number of different objections to trying the case this year. He mentions Judge Newman leaving the bench on January 1st and not trying these cases. And Judge Newman seemed a little bewildered. He said, well, tell me about that. Harpootlian has a federal trial in December. He has the oldest civil case in Lexington County, one where 5 children were killed by their father 8 years ago. And the family is suing the Department of Social Services. They now have a trial date for October 30th, and that should be a 2 to 3 week trial. Jim Griffin is in federal trial the week of October 3rd, and Harpootlian said it's already September. These pending cases they have that are upcoming are not going to be done until early November. He also said it's still going to take them time to get ready for Alec's new trial. He said the case was finished 6 months ago. He says this case was finished 6 months ago and has had more publicity than any case in the state and maybe in the country. He said it's been podcasted and blogged. And then he said, podcasters are grasping at their 15 minutes of fame to hang on to this. I'll keep my mouth shut. He also talks about a change of venue. He cites 2 South Carolina cases about pre-trial publicity that would back a continuance as well as a change of venue. He asks, where do we find a jury to try this case less than a year after the murder trial? So Judge Newman lists a lot of counties in the Low Country and says a jury can be impaneled, and there was no motion to change that venue. He said the test isn't based on speculation. You have to first try to get a jury. Harpootlian said there was a juror in the murder trial who could have been excused and told others, I want to be on this trial. He mentions the motion for a new trial they have filed with the jury tampering allegations. By the way, the Attorney General, the deadline for them to respond to this motion is today. So I'm interested to see what they have to say. And I will probably do a YouTube short when that drops. So if you're not subscribed, please hit subscribe. If you want notifications when I update new videos, hit that bell button because The shorts don't necessarily go on the main page, and I try to put little nuggets in there that are really quick things to talk about, but not enough for a full episode. Harpootlian asks, what's the hurry? The victims will have their day in court. He says the way the state is doing this is to make another national case. He said he's offended the attorney general has a lot of other cases court TV won't be there for. And he said this is a spectacle. He asked Judge Newman to put his feelings about the murder trial to the side and allow the defense to prepare for the trial. He also asked, why doesn't the attorney general put distance between the murder case and if there will be a trial on the financial cases? He said ultimately he's just bewildered as to what the hurry is. The state says this is not a spectacle. The indictments have been investigated and were done in November of 2021, 2 months after the side of the road incident where Alec claimed to have been shot by somebody, and now we know he set it up. He says if the defense wants to file a motion, that's okay, but don't presume prejudice. Let's wait and see if a jury could be found. He said only if there is an inability to do so should we look for a change of venue. Creighton Waters says the defense can't run down the street to the feds to bypass the accountability that needs to happen with the state charges. He said this case takes priority, and that's why the state wants to move this case forward. So the defense says, well, this wasn't his argument when he called the murder case first a year ago. He said that was indicted after the financial crimes. Now it's the most important thing in the world. He mentions Creighton Waters and the prosecutors decided to try that murder case first. He said, based on our schedule and other cases, we would be ineffective in preparing for this trial or any trial. The state says that's not what happened. I was willing to try the financial cases first. It was actually the defense's motion for a speedy trial and Harpootlian's waiver of legislative immunity, which is what led to the murder cases being done first. Harpootlian said, no, it was up to Creighton Waters. So Creighton Waters shakes his head no. He chose to try the murder case first. He said the only reason the murder case went first was because of Dick Harpootlian. So we have a little back and forth here. Judge Newman says the trial date will be set before the end of the year. He talks about the week of November 13th, the 27th, or December 11th to try whatever case is pending in those venues. Harpootlian asked if he and the defense can confer and email Judge Newman their preference later today. Newman says you can confer while we move on to the next matter. Harpootlian said without waiving his previous objections, November 27th would be best, but still would not give them time to prepare. This is actually the Monday after Thanksgiving. I hope to go to this, by the way. Harpootlian asked about the venue on the 27th, and Judge Newman said whatever venue, the predominant number of cases pending in Hampton County. Harpootlian asked about venue on the 27th when this trial starts, and Judge Newman says whatever venue, it's down to the predominant number of cases pending in Hampton County. The state says the Satterfield case in Beaufort has the largest amount of loss, but if they are scheduling issues, they will do Hampton. It will make a lot of sense to do Satterfield first. So Judge Newman ruled that the trial for the Satterfield financial crimes will be held beginning on November 27th. Judge Newman asks for a deadline for motions to be filed before this trial starts, and the state says November 10th for the final day for motions, and responses the following week should be due by November 17th. He said it may make sense to have a hearing prior to trial date due to pretrial issues. Dick Harpootlian said there's no reason they can't deal with it that morning because their schedules are complicated. Creighton Waters mentions Veterans Day will be observed Friday, November 10th, and Harpootlian says, kind of snarky, God, I know I don't want to have to work on Veterans Day. Oh my gosh. He says, I know the state loves their holidays, but he says he and Griffin are going to have to rearrange personal matters. Harpootlian said he was planning to visit his wife overseas, and that ain't happening now. He said, perhaps we will have to work Veterans Day. Sorry. Creighton Waters says, these people next to me work just as hard as the defense does. Speaking of the prosecution team, Judge Newman says maybe you'll have everything prepared the day before on the 9th. Another attorney stands up, and I believe this is Russell Laffitte's attorney. He says, you're not involved in this case. And he said, my client is involved in this case. So that kind of ended Murdaugh, and then they bring in Russell Laffitte. The state is prepared to go forward with any date the court sets. The Hampton cases are Hakeem Pickney, Miss Thomas, and then Allendale is Mr. Badger. The defense says he's co-defendants with Murdaugh in these cases, and they've asked to set a trial date for one of the cases in the fall of next year. The defense says the federal case is intertwined in this, and he says they have a briefing scheduled for the Fourth Circuit concerning his appeal for the federal conviction, and he has no choice. They originally set the schedule for September 28th, and the Fourth Circuit consolidated those schedules and will now set a new briefing schedule in a week or two. The state says much of the discovery is the same as the other cases. The charge in the state grand jury is the underlying offenses of the victims, Thomas, Pickney, Badger, and that goes back for a decade or more when these crimes began to be committed. The state is prepared to try this case whenever Judge Newman finds a date, and they're happy to go in the fall of this year, but they can talk about the spring. But Creighton Water says fall is the sweet spot. He said to wait until fall of 2024 to try these cases and hoping something gets scheduled prior to the safe zone being reached again. He said, I don't think that's appropriate for justice in this case. But ultimately, he said if a date gets set, the state will be prepared to try the case. The defense says, I didn't try the federal case, but I've reviewed the transcript and the indictment. I disagree with the state. The federal government didn't just charge those two bank fraud counts. They charged an underlying mail and wire fraud and bank fraud conspiracy that included the conduct of Mr. Laffitte and Alec Murdaugh's dealings with the alleged victims of this case. He says he hasn't tried to cross the discovery they got in the federal case with this case, but he said they're different. In this case, there's the testimony of 30 separate grand jury witnesses, and he said he has not read those transcripts. Judge Newman asked the first time that this attorney appeared at a status conference in this case and requested more time. And the defense says in April, he said they've been dealing with Laffitte's federal case ever since. The defense goes on to say, I understand the federal case is different than the state's case, but I wasn't aware until today that we might be talking about trying cases in the fall. He said, that's on me. And if I have to get ready, I have to get ready. But I haven't read all 30 transcripts from the federal case. The state says in April, they said they were ready to try the case when a date could be set, and they were eyeballing the fall. 5 months later, the defense has had the discovery for a long time. He said, I understand what the defense is dealing with, but this case has been indicted, discovery provided, and if we don't get this done before the end of the year, we're looking at a trial date of fall of 2024. I think that's too long to wait with the importance of the allegations here. So for the Roberts case, that has a December 18th trial date. Judge Newman asked Mr. Rutherford, who is a defense attorney, if he has anything to add. Mr. Rutherford said his client has already been convicted. It took 2.5 weeks to try that in a federal court, and he is appealing the case. The state can call any case they want and keep their foot on the gas, and this is all they get to focus on. He said, every case I have scheduled through the end of the year is older than this case. He also says the state wants him to waive his legislative immunity, which he would happily do if they waive cases whenever they get ready and waive their ability to work on one case solely. The defense says we don't have that ability. The case Dick Harpootlian and Jim Griffin brought up in December, he said, mine is possibly scheduled for the same week because it's the same facts. They have stated that week is reserved for the case they decided to call, which was the Satterfields. There's 41,000 documents transcribed from the federal trial alone. He said there's no way they could be prepared by the end of the year. He said that the state is the reason that these cases drag on because they get to decide when they call this case for trial. The defense goes on to say, if it requires a December date, I would not be present at JMSC for a month when we're scanning potential candidates for judicial seats. He said there's no way that he could do that and also prepare for this trial. He says if the state waives their right to call cases when they want, I will give up my immunity, but until then, I will not. Fall of 2024 is reasonable given the circumstances of this case. The defense says if Russell's federal appeal is unsuccessful, he may have a decision to make about this case that could result in it not even going to trial. Nobody wants to go through a trial if it's not necessary. Creighton Water says, I have control of the state grand jury charges. That's why we're here, not some other circuit or looking at a different case. The state is here to say if Judge Newman sets the trial date, we are ready. Waters says we can do the 2 indictments in Hampton. The defense says if he wants to consolidate the cases in Hampton, he needs to make a motion and then the defense would respond. He said he does not know what his position would be, though. They'll know if Russell will report to federal prison anytime soon. He said he expected to learn that yesterday. As of now, that report date is Thursday. If the defense doesn't get a decision today about him remaining out during the appeal process, he will ask the judge to extend his report date one more time. When he does get a report date, it will make it more difficult to try a case this fall because he won't have access to Laffitte because he is in Jessup Federal Correctionals. That's in Georgia, and it's 5 hours away. The judge has the authority to recommend where a prisoner spends their time, but it isn't always a given that that's going to happen. Judge Newman said he would defer his decision until they can review things maybe in a month or 6 weeks and see where they are. So we move on to the sentencing of Cory Fleming. On August 23rd, he pled guilty to all 23 state charges. When the state got involved in 2021, they found out Cory had been stealing from his clients since 2012. The state says so. When he tells the court, I stole a little, but was hoodooed by Alec, I asked the court to consider that. The Pinckney wreck happened in 2009, and that resulted in terrible injuries in that family and also resulted in Hakeem's death. Cory knew how to interact with his clients and develop a personal relationship with Hakeem's mom. But we see at the same time, he's telling her he's taking care of her, going to her hospital bed. Doesn't take him long to steal a couple of checks so he and Alec can get a private plane and go to the College World Series. They also, by the way, bill that as if it's a medical expense. How low can you go, y'all? The state goes on to say, look at what he did and how long it's gone on. He dispersed a large amount of money to Miss Pinckney the right way, and these clients get so distracted by these life-changing checks that they aren't paying attention to the sleight of hand going on behind their back. This is what Cory did with his law license. The order submitted reflects $48,000 in legal fees due to Alec, but they ended up in the pocket of Cory Fleming, and that's how the state grand jury figured all this out. He said they saw this $48,000 reference, but no check coming into the PMPED law firm, which is Murdaugh's former law firm. It was Satterfield in reverse. Cory was the beneficiary. It was going on between 2012 and 2014, around the time he first stole from Miss Pinckney. In 2017, Cory still has money belonging to her in his account, supposedly to satisfy liens, and that's money you can steal or steal from. So Cory cuts a check for $4,560 for fake expenses from her money and delivers it to Alec. And then he says, think of how these two men operated together. There was an $89,000 check of hers that went to PMPED, and Alec promptly converts it to Forge. He sat by her bedside as she recovered. Does he call her in 2017 and say, hey, great news, I have $89,000 of your money? No, he gives the check to Alec's law firm, and then Alec takes it over to Forge. One check for over $400,000 that Cory made from his trust account to Forge, which in itself is ridiculous. Just the word Forge. A second check for over $2.9 million that was supposed to go to this family, and he points to the family. The third check of $118,000 was made out to Forge. That was to go to Hakeem's family. Cory wants to convince the court when he cut checks and gave them to Alec made out to Forge, he did not know Alec may take that money. He said it doesn't make sense with the history and the evidence. His own staff testified he did things differently in this case. He never called the family and asked, hey, did you get your money? Then they talk about the Satterfields, how Alec told her sons he would take care of them. And who did he bring in? His longtime co-conspirator, Cory Fleming. He never updated them, advised them about any recoveries or settlement offers, and never told them money was being directed to Forge. He never said that he and Alec were dipping into their money for their own gain. Why doesn't he tell him he was going to cut his fee in half? Because he had an arrangement with Alec Murdaugh. He and Alec co-litigated the case. Alec acted as co-counsel in a case where Alec was the defendant. These boys, talking about Gloria's sons, Brian and Tony, this family deserve compensation. They were nothing more than a vehicle for Cory and Alec to steal money. In 2018, two policies, $500,000 from Lloyd's of London. Tony Satterfield was the personal representative for the account. Nobody called him to say we got $500,000 from that settlement. In fact, they have an email where he tells staff to hold the check until they get the PR check. Why did he do that if he thought that money would really go to the boys? That check cut in December. They make it out to who was going to be the new PR, which was somebody by the name of Chad Westendorf. He was always told by Cory, I got it. I'll handle it. That's not Alec. That's Cory, according to the evidence. December 2018, Tony Satterfield is convinced by Alec to sign over being personal representative of the estate so this scheme can take effect. An order was filed that was retroactive to March about the PR. He went on to lay out bullet points of the crimes. So Tony Satterfield gets up to talk to give his victim impact statement. This young man just inspires me and makes me smile every time I see him. He said, we think our actions don't affect other people, but they do, and they did. He also gave the glory to God. It was very brief, but very pointed. And we all could take a lesson from Mr. Satterfield about forgiveness and giving grace because he has. Gloria's sister was next to speak. She said, our family was affected in a tremendous way. We trusted the system and what we considered to be family to us. He admitted what he did was wrong. We forgive him. It doesn't take away the hurt he's caused us. Also, we feel Gloria did not die in vain because her case brought out a lot of corruption to other people. Things are coming to light now that should have come to light a long, long time ago. She thanks the state and the judge. Up next was Eric Bland. He said he has had the honor of speaking for the Satterfield family, and he is a lawyer of 35 years. On behalf of other lawyers who are honest and do good by their clients, he said our license as lawyers is a sacred trust that we have to help our clients. It's not a ticket or a license to take from our clients. He said it's natural. We want to dislike criminals like Cory Fleming. You're going to hear from a courtroom full of people who say he's a nice guy. But unfortunately, sometimes nice guys do criminal activity. You have to balance today, the sentencing today, but sentencing the crime because our profession, the profession I love, and speaking to Judge Newman, he says the profession you love and you've dedicated your life to has been stained. When lawyers take money from their clients, and in this case, millions of dollars, the jokes multiply by 10. He goes on to talk about how he doesn't like lawyer jokes and people talking bad about attorneys. One criminal activity in our profession germinates and hurts our profession for a long time. Now, I think it's important you understand Mr. Fleming knew what he was doing. He was a plaintiff's lawyer. He had settled plaintiff cases before. And in this particular case, he worked with the party he was making the claim against. Yet it's impossible to get your arms around the fact that he didn't have the client's permission to do that. He never had a fee agreement with the client. The contingency fees have to be in writing. There wasn't a contingency fee agreement. There was no joint sharing agreement with Alec Murdaugh, even though he couldn't do it to begin with, to disclose to the client, and there were no disclosures to the client at all. He met with Tony as the PR one time. There has never been any communication. Mr. Bland goes on to say, I've been suing lawyers for probably 30 of my 35 years, and I've never seen every single dollar taken from a settlement. You see sometimes a portion, but in this case, they took every single dollar and never communicated with Tony or his brother. He says Mr. Fleming won't use the word victim like he has in the last 2 years in here. He said he was a victim like everyone else, but you're going to hear off words, which may be close, maybe first cousins of the word victim. You're going to hear he didn't understand what was going on. He says, but sure he did. If you're going to do a structure, your honor knows you have to have an insurance policy to represent that structure. When you have two beneficiaries of that structure, there would be two separate policy numbers, one for Tony Satterfield, one for his brother, Brian. If you're going to send a structured check to the insurance company, you have to allocate. You can't just send a check for $2.9 million to an insurance company and not have any reference on that check. This amount is for Brian. This amount is for Tony, and it needs to be deposited into the account and applied to that insurance policy number. But none of that was ever done in this case. Cory Fleming sent the check without a cover letter, no note or letter to Forge saying this is how it's allocated. It was sent to a P.O. box in Hampton County. Every plaintiff lawyer knows that Forge, the real Forge, is in Columbia, South Carolina, and Atlanta, Georgia, not in some P.O. box. The 3 checks Mr. Waters described were signed by Alec Murdaugh, DBA Forge. Remember, he created that fake Forge account at Palmetto State Bank, which is how he was able to put these monies in. He said it was really 2 letters they were saying, and magically, $4.3 million was produced. That's a tremendous amount of money. He said it's a large settlement and probably 3 times larger than most other counties in the state. Cory took $11,500 in expenses in a case where there's no filing fees, no depositions, no experts. He had signed a disbursement sheet in May of 2019, which was signed by a judge. And when you sign an order, of course, lawyers have to follow that. But here's the kicker. He never filed that order with the clerk of court. They went to Judge Carmen Mullen and said they wanted to take Alec's name off the caption, Estate of Gloria Satterfield versus Alec Murdaugh. And Bland says, I can't do that without your honor's permission, but it was done without a court order. Then they took off Gloria Satterfield estate and the decedent to make it look like she wasn't dead at all. Then they went back to Judge Carmen Mullen after they got the signed order and said, this is how we're going to disperse it. No reference. They were going to send $2.9 million of the $3.8 million to that fake Forge account. We know they didn't give it to Brian and Tony. What did they do? They started a check cutting party on May 14th. If I'm going to deviate from the order the judge signed off on, the disbursement sheet, I have to come before your honor and do that. He points to Gloria's son, Brian, who was sitting kind of on the front row, and said he is a vulnerable adult who's in his 30s. He's lost his mother, and Alec and Cory knew his trailer was being foreclosed on, and he didn't have the money. But Alec and Cory were sitting on $4.3 million of their money while he's getting pushed out on the street and losing his mother's trailer. And this really hit hard to me. He said that's all she had was that trailer. Look at who she was working for. Look how long she worked for the Murdaugh family. Paul and Buster affectionately called her Go-Go. Paul had one picture in his wallet, and it was of Gloria. And this woman seems to be living hand to mouth, living in a trailer. And then when she's gone, they're going to let him get evicted. But what did Cory Fleming do? He kept that money in his account. Judge Mullins signed an order for him to disperse every penny from the trust account. But Cory kept that money in a trust for a case that was over with. When in May, he went to Judge Mullins and said, I needed an additional $105,000 for expenses we spent. That was blatant thievery. October 12th of 2020, 17 months later, they cut more checks. Then they decided to get that case off the docket. Cory and Alec signed a stipulation of dismissal, and Alec had an attorney, and he wasn't contacted. Cory knew there was a lawyer involved, and yet they dismissed the case. He sits on another $113,000 for a year, all the way into the fall of 2021, when he was caught. When Eric Bland and Ronnie Richter, his law partner, surfaced on September 7th. He did transfer the $113,000 to the trust for my clients, and there were additional monies paid by his law firm. Of all the defendants we've got money for, we've recovered more than $7.5 million for our clients. That's the Satterfield boys. The last thing I want to add is he fought these charges. He wrote a letter to the Georgia bar. Unlike South Carolina bar procedures, the Georgia bar proceedings are open. Eric Bland said, I was a complaining party. He said, when I bring a claim against a lawyer for malpractice or theft, it's my duty to notify the bar. I notified the South Carolina and Georgia bars. I'm part of the process in Georgia. They want to hear from the complaining party. When he filed his response, which was 57 pages, meaning Cory Fleming, under oath, swore to tell the truth, he told the Georgia bar, I'm a victim of Alec Murdaugh. I had no idea. I was duped like everyone else. Bland goes on to say, you don't get the check when you settle. It goes from the insurance company to the annuities insurance company who issues that structure. He already had the checks. You don't send the money to forge. He said, I stole from my partners, not the clients. We don't have licenses to steal from our law partners. He talks about how Judge Newman cares about their state and their profession, and this whole spectacle has stained our state. Bland says, I will leave saying one thing. The hand of one is the hand of all. Cory is pleading guilty to all the charges. Next up, Justin Bamberg. He represents Pamela Pinckney. He said she wanted to be here, but she's had a medical procedure and has been in a lot of pain. He said that speaks to the type of people who were victimized. We sat through a federal case and heard things done to the Satterfields. What he did to her was mentioned in the Fed case, meaning to Hakeem's mom. She wasn't able to seek criminal justice, but that's why we're here today. We think white-collar crime just involves money, and that's not the case. This was a horrendous accident. Not only did she shatter most of the bones in her body, she dealt with injuries to others she cared about, like her niece, who, in addition to numerous injuries, lost vision in one of her eyes. Her son, Hakeem, she poured her soul into that young man. He lost his hearing at the age of 3 and struggled with that, but she never gave up on her son. He graduated from the South Carolina School for the Deaf and Blind and had a lot of ambitions. After the accident, he was a quadriplegic on a ventilator. He could not use sign language, so he couldn't communicate. He died. His ventilator was unplugged. He couldn't hear, speak, or move. He can't breathe, and he couldn't tell anyone. That's powerful, y'all. He became a prisoner in his own body. Instead of being a supportive lawyer showing compassion or care, sympathy or empathy, he could have said to her, I'm sorry for what you've went through. I want to own up to the fact that I took your money. But he didn't. He took her money and flew to the College World Series on a private plane. This woman is still suffering about the loss of her son, and no one cared. We believe Cory regrets everything he did. It's hard not to regret your decision when you're sitting there. And he points over to where Cory is sitting. But we do not believe he is remorseful. And there's a difference between regretting getting caught and true remorse for what you did. We hear these numbers stolen, and we have to remember where we come from. An $8,000 check may not sound like a lot compared to $4 million. Talking about the Satterfield case. Minimum wage equals out to $15,850 a year. Some of the money she lost, she would have had to have worked half a year to earn, and in addition, pay taxes on that. He said, we trust the system. This was a black eye to attorneys, legal professionals, and to our state. Cory knew he wasn't supposed to do it. We believe it wasn't until the feds came and there was a window of opportunity to possibly serve a sentence in federal prison, then Cory was willing to say, yes, I did X, Y, and Z. Up to there was nothing. They were a victim of bad acts from bad actors. Then to hear the bad actors say they're victims is offensive. You will hear how he was good to his family, but he was not good to everyone else. Mr. Bamberg asked Judge Newman to take into consideration, saying this is the first chance in over a decade for this family to get justice. Nobody willingly gave him their money. He deceived them. He has a federal sentence, but that's not for Miss Pinckney. We ask you to sentence him firmly. This broke my heart, y'all. He said the saddest part about her is even with the death of her son and her broken bones and medical bills, if Cory needed money and asked her, she would have given it to him. This is the type of person she is. That is who is victimized. Boom. Bland and Bamberg laid it out. Cory Fleming gave a long statement to the court. I'm also not going through all the positive things his family has to say about him. You can imagine what they would say. Cory Fleming said, for many years, I stood in this very courtroom representing people who broke the law. I was aware a series of bad decisions can have life-changing consequences. I made terrible decisions and broke the law. I offer no excuses. There are none. I blame myself and nobody else. I never imagined standing here in this circumstance. It's a difficult, constant feeling I will carry with me the rest of my life. He thanks both families for forgiving him and praying for him. He said, it's helped me during this difficult time. I can't say sorry enough to any of these people. He says to the Satterfield boys, your mom was a good woman. You deserved a good lawyer who had your best interest at heart. I failed you. To Miss Pickney, I not only treated you as a client, I treated you as a friend. Your entire family was good to me. I've no words for how you must feel about me. He apologized to his staff and his family, his friends, as well as the community of Beaufort as a whole. He cries as he apologizes to his wife, kids, and family and says he will always live with the shame he has put on their family, and he feels he doesn't deserve their support. A lot of people spoke about what I've lost, but I look at what I've gained. I've grown spiritually and emotionally. He said he chose to plead guilty in the federal and state cases, not knowing what his sentence would be, but he trusts the legal system. He said, the very one I betrayed. Judge Newman says, since coming back here for murder and doing that trial in March, I was back here a few weeks ago for another trial in Colleton County. A mom who had been Teacher of the Year left her 13-year-old totally handicapped and disabled child in a car starting at 11 a.m. when it was 91 degrees outside and left that child in the car until 5 or 6 p.m. The woman was constantly in and around the car with her boyfriend, and a climate expert testified the car inside got up to 139 degrees. And you're talking about remorse and presentation over this mother and her mistakes. She was on methamphetamine with her boyfriend. She was remorseful. The presentation of a mother who loved her child but went wayward and was more worried about using drugs and pleasing her boyfriend than caring for her own child. She got 37 years in prison, convicted of murder. But people say she loved her child in court. There was nothing she wouldn't do for her child. Took her to Special Olympics. But in the end, she abandoned her child. Listening to Mr. Bamberg talk about Hakeem, I'm thinking about that same vulnerability. We have the good. We all have the bad in us. Everyone was here to tell me all the good. We're dealing with the consequences of the bad. And that's as bad as it gets in this case for a lawyer. When you carry on a scheme over a decade without charges or convictions, that's a record of your life. And as bad as it was with Miss Pickney and the Satterfields, he said, I know friends and colleagues were shocked. Not about the good he's done, but about the Cory in these cases. When people come to me and lay the burden, asking me to be lenient, ultimately, I believe in justice and mercy, but leniency is not part of my scripture. He mentions Cory Fleming is facing 195 years in prison. He said, my heart bleeds for you because I have no doubt the quality of human being that you are, as reflected by all the positive comments, you must suffer the consequences of your actions. If I were to impose sentences on each indictment individually, you would be here for a few hours probably. So the sentencing was very confusing, y'all. Not even gonna lie. We were all trying to figure out what in the heck he was sentenced to because there were some things that were concurrent, some things that were consecutive. Michael DeWitt, who was in the courtroom yesterday, I met him during the murder trial. Great guy. He said, Cory Fleming sentence clarified, 10 years for the Satterfield crimes, concurrent with the federal sentence. 10 years for the Pinckney crimes, to be served consecutively after the first 10 for a total of 20 years. There was just so much confusion that he asked Creighton Waters to break down what that sentence was. So that was it. And I think that that was a really good resolution for this case for Fleming. You know, you think about when Mr. Bland and Mr. Bamberg so beautifully laid out these humans that were taken advantage of and stolen from by Alec and Cory. It just really brings it back home. It's not about Alec Murdaugh. It's not about Cory Fleming. Let them serve their time. This is all about these victims. Man, just you see how this is going to go. And there were so many charges. Whether or not most of these end up at trial remains to be seen. But yesterday, some justice was served. And I know these families are very relieved to have this part over. So that's it for today. I hope you have a great rest of the day. We'll see you soon.